As is tradition, at 13 years of age, you were bar mitzvahed in a conservative temple. I want to ask you, what was your knowledge or impression of God at this stage in your life? I mean, you were going through this rite of passage as a young boy becoming a man.
I went to Hebrew school 3 days a week. Then on Sundays, had a private tutor to prepare me for my bar mitzvah. And I don't ever remember, Mark, I'm not saying it never happened. I'm just saying I don't ever remember them talking to me about how God loved me personally, individually, uniquely. I never was taught how to open my heart out to the Lord. In fact, in many circles within Judaism, God is someone that's like so far away, you don't like personally know him. Mm-hmm. So my experience growing up in the synagogue was I basically memorized my portion that I was going to be reciting from the Torah and the prophets for my bar mitzvah. I learned how to read Hebrew, but it was very, like I said, for me, I experienced no personal connection with the light and the glory of God. You know, my experience was very, very typical of many Jewish people, at least in my time frame. I grew up, you know, I was bar mitzvahed. I'm 4 years old. I came to faith in 1978 at 20 years old. But during that time period for me in Hebrew school, it was not a charismatic experience, to say the least.
You entered into high school. You had aspirations in wrestling because you were quite the wrestler in high school, won a number of championships after graduating. But wrestling went away, and it kind of left you sort of battling a bit of an identity crisis. How did this affect you?
Well, to say how it affected me, it almost feels like that, Marco, is an understatement, because I was so empty, lost, broken, confused, cast into a state of fear when wrestling ended, because I didn't know who I was anymore. From the time I was in 7th grade, wrestling became larger and larger in my life till the time I got to 11th grade. It was my total purpose for living, my total identity. Everything I was wrapped up in wrestling. I trained year long, wore a statue around my neck, a necklace with the wrestler on it. People in my school knew me as Kurt Schneider, the wrestler. I was really searching for a sense of significance in wrestling. My goal was to become state champ. I never reached that goal, but I got to a place where I felt like I didn't feel there was anybody that I could not beat. So I, in a sense, was living my reality in my own mind. Mm-hmm. And I felt fantastic as long as I kept in that world. And that's all that I concerned myself with, because I was on top in that world and in control, and I had purpose and a very clear path. But when I walked off the wrestling mat, after wrestling my last match in high school, I realized in an instant that I was going into a world now, a much bigger world than wrestling. And wrestling didn't mean a hill of beans anymore. And not only that, I realized that there were dangers in the world that I was vulnerable to and was not protected from. For example, getting cancer, getting in a car wreck. The chances of those things happening to me were small, but it was still possible. And the fact that it was even possible that I could die in a car wreck or cancer really just made me feel extremely vulnerable and afraid.
In this season of your search for validation and direction and what was next, I mean, you would describe yourself in being a place of desperation. You had a dream at 20 years old, 1978. Tell us about it.
Yep. I actually use the term vision of the night because it didn't seem like just a dream to me. When it happened, I knew that the Lord had revealed himself to me. But what happened, Mark, as you said, it was 1978. I was 20 years old. I was searching, and I was reading a book called Autobiography of a Yogi by a man named Paramahansa Yogananda, who was some new age guru in India. Someone had recommended the book to me. He said, this yogi from India can beat up tigers with his bare hands and do these supernatural feats. It really intrigued me. Went out and bought the book, Mark. First book I ever bought with my own money in my life. Started devouring the book. There were pictures in the book of this yogi from India supposedly levitating off the ground. In other words, seated in a lotus position like the yogis do, and, suspended in midair 3 feet off the ground. And I always believed in God. I said, God, if that's real, if this guy can really levitate off the ground, I said, I found my new wrestling. That's what I want to do with my life, because this is a higher reality than making money. And I thought to myself, think how incredible you'd feel levitating off the ground. You'd be feeling bliss. And this would not be a reality that would end like wrestling did. This would be like something you'd get to the top of the mountain and be able to stay there. So I was in the middle of reading this book. No one had ever talked to me about Jesus. I had never read the New Testament. But in the middle of reading this book, I went to sleep one night. It was a hot August night. And in the middle of that night, I was awoken from my sleep. And suddenly I was aware that something was happening. It was like a heightened state of awareness. My eyes were still closed, but in that state, in color, Jesus appeared to me in a vision. He was on the cross. I could see the terrain the cross was staked in. And then a ray of red light from straight through the sky, from straight through the blue sky, beamed down on Jesus' head. And when I saw that ray of red light from the sky, Mark, come down on Jesus' head, I knew the light was coming from God because of the symbolism, and that the Lord was telling me that Jesus was the way to him. As an American, I knew enough to know the person on the cross was Jesus. So when that happened, I knew that God had just shown me the way. I knew no Christian doctrine, like I said. I mean, I was totally biblically illiterate, but I knew that God had just revealed himself to me, shown me that Jesus was the way, and suddenly hope was birthed in my heart.
Divine revelation, really nothing shy of divine revelation that started you on this journey, like just incredible transformation. Now, Rabbi, your family didn't embrace Jesus as you did. They went to great lengths to get you to denounce your newfound faith. Tell us about those experiences.
Yeah. Well, my family, first of all, I'm sure they felt very betrayed. And I didn't realize this at the time because Jesus was never talked about in my home. So I was not prepared, nor was I sensitive to what my mom and dad and brother and sister were experiencing. But I started, I woke up the next morning, I started telling them about what had happened to me. They didn't react at first, started telling everybody about it. And eventually somebody said to me, well, you need to go get a New Testament. I knew a lot of people, even though my closest friends were all Jews. But someone said, you need to go get a New Testament. So I got a New Testament, started devouring the Word of God. I'd find verses in the Bible like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. And I thought this was the coolest thing since sliced bread. And I'd go up to my dad, I'd say, Dad, look at this verse, or my brother. And they just looked at me like completely blank. And at this point, they started really getting shaken up when they saw how serious I was, that it wasn't just a dream that was going to go away. And so, they very much, I think, went into fear, panic, shame. And as you said, took some extreme measures to try to get me to, move on from Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, you describe them even bringing you to a deprogrammer, if you will, quote unquote, to try and get you to shift your way of thinking back to your Jewish people, your Jewish roots, even as far as psychiatric assessments. This just wasn't making sense for them. I want to ask you, it's maybe a really loaded question for you, Rabbi, because you're in ministry now to the Jewish people of our world that you desire for them to meet the Jewish Jesus. What do you think makes it difficult for Jewish people to accept or embrace Jesus when so many of the prophets they read and celebrate and study foretold his coming?
For Jewish people, many of them, the most important thing is it's being accepted and being a part of the Jewish community. And so someone like myself, a Jew that's embraced Jesus, we are excommunicated from the Jewish people. I mean, I am not considered a Jew anymore by the traditional Jewish community. It makes no sense. I mean, I could be an atheist and they'd still consider me a Jew. I could believe in Buddhism and I'd still be considered a Jew. I could be in the New Age and still be considered a Jew. But as soon as I say I believe in Jesus, they say you're not Jewish anymore. It's the same thing that happened in Jesus' day. When they discovered people in Jesus' day that believed in Jesus, the Pharisees would put them out of the synagogue.
Right.
And so that's what's still happening today. So Jewish people are not open to examining the scriptures, most of them with an open mind, because accepting Jesus would cost them too much. And it's a price that not many are willing to pay. I wrote a book describing my whole experience. It's called Call to Breakthrough. I talk about my parents hiring the deprogrammer, how my dad kind of set me up and told me we were going to talk to a businessman about buying a restaurant, when in reality, we went to the hotel where I was not to meet a businessman, but was kidnapped really by the deprogrammers that my parents hired. This is how anathema it is for a Jew that believes in Jesus. So this explains why you find very few Jewish people that are open to the gospel, because again, it's considered so untasteful to Jewish people. And, part of that, the church has to take responsibility for, because Jewish people have suffered so much persecution in the name of Christ that Jesus is and Christians are kind of on the other team. We have stories and testimonies of how Hitler's picture was hung in the churches in Germany during the Holocaust. So, there are several reasons why it's difficult for Jewish people to believe in Jesus. But when you're desperate like I was, and when God shows up supernaturally and showed me that Jesus was the way, God put it together so that I could embrace him through his grace fully. And I certainly, am happy to do that. And, we've been appointed not only to reign with him, but to suffer with him.
God bless you, Rabbi Schneider. There's nothing like getting a perspective on our faith from one of Jesus' very own people, and that you are. We will continue to pray for Jewish people around the world that they will accept Yeshua. And we pray, obviously, continually for the peace of Jerusalem, as we're instructed in John 14:23. Thank you so much for your ministry to the world and for your testimony for Jesus. And God bless you. Can't wait to speak to you again.
Brother, a privilege to be on 100 Huntley today. I really enjoyed it.